Hello and welcome back to another lesson from Mr. Matthews. So today we're going to be looking at AQA English Language Paper 2 Section A. We're going to be looking at question 3. So last week we looked at question 2, the summary question. This week question 3, which is almost exactly the same as question 2 on paper 1, which we'll talk a little bit about during the course of this video. The key skills are for assessment objective 2, which is to analyse writers' methods, focus on the use of subject terminology, explore the effects that the writer creates, and analyse the evidence that's in front of us. So a few key words on the left-hand side: explore, analyse, refer, and method. Just want you to have a little think about what those words mean to you. What do you think they mean? As these words are very much the sort of key words that relate to this question. If you're unsure as to what any of these words mean, please do look them up in a dictionary or on Google, just so you are certain that you understand what each of these words means. Okay, so we're going to start off with writing down our title. How can I successfully answer question 3 on paper 2? So there's 3 questions that I want you to think about for students that I teach. What are the key skills that paper 2 question 2 requires? That goes back to last week. So what were the key skills from last week's video? To what extent is Macbeth responsible for his actions? Just want you to have a think. That's like, sort of like an essay style question. So your idea can be as detailed or simple as you want it to be. And then lastly, how many marks is question 5 worth on both language papers? And how important is that question? So please complete the power of 3 just as a recall task. Excuse me. I'd then like you to go and have a look at the learning objectives on the left-hand side. So the key things that we're going to be looking at today: to understand how to approach question 3, to be able to write a response to question 3, analysing keywords and phrases, and then lastly, to be able to write a detailed and perceptive response to question 3 using a range of textual references. Okay, so just a quick look again at the assessment objectives. Now there are 4 assessment objectives for this paper, but question 3 only requires us to focus on assessment objective 2, which is the one with the giant tick next to it. And I mentioned that at the start of the lesson, but yeah, analyse methods, subject terminology, explore effects, and analyse the evidence. Top tips for question 3. So first of all, ensure that you follow the bullet points that are on the question. Make a comment on keywords or phrases, techniques, and sentence structures where possible. The question's worth 12 marks and only requires the reading of 1 source, so it should definitely be prioritised. It's arguably the second most important question on the paper. You might consider it the most important question, as it's slightly easier, in my opinion, than question 4. So there is a potential to get the highest marks on this question. You should follow a PEED structure with a strong focus on development. So I will go through the PEED structure that I try to teach. That structure is really a foolproof method for answering this question. Ensure you allow at least 15 minutes to answer the question. If you spend slightly less time on question 5, that does give you a little bit more time to answer this question if you need it. And then lastly, the strategies for this question are identical to question 2 on paper 1. So they are both focused on the same thing. They're worded almost identically, and that's quite good, I think, that there's a question across both papers that is basically identical. It's just one less thing to think about and worry about. Okay, so to start with, I would like you to read through the examination extract taken from an article written in 1848 titled "Insurrection in Paris." We to highlight any words which you do not understand or you're unfamiliar with. You can look those up on Google or dictionary to help you and improve your vocabulary. Generally, there are some quite tricky words in this source because it's from an older period in time, normally from the 19th century. So there will be tricky words and vocabulary in there. Please look them up to familiarise yourself and recap what those words mean. And I would like you to consider the answers to the following questions after we've read through the extract, which I will do for those that need a bit of support with reading in a minute. So first of all, for Platinum students, what is striking or surprising about the language, and what images stand out the most to you? What effects is the writer trying to achieve with their language choices? And Silver, what is the passage about? What is the subject matter of the passage? Try to sort of summarize what you think is happening and what it's about. And the stretch and challenge question, for those that want to sort of get ahead for this lesson and push themselves, how do you think the writer tries to influence the reader? And what is the writer's viewpoint? And that will tie in nicely with question 4, which will be coming next week. And I'll be keeping the extracts the same just to make that a bit easier as well. So, I'm going to read out the extract for those that need a little bit of extra support, or maybe just a little bit too lazy to read themselves. But here we go. So source B, Insurrection in Paris, published on Wednesday, 28th June, 1848. This revolt has at last been quashed, but the fighting continued for 4 days, and the combatants seem to have been animated with the most obstinate fury. Torrents of blood have flowed, but the accounts are so various that it is impossible to state the number of killed and wounded. One report estimates the total number of slain at 11,000, but others speak of smaller numbers, although it is owned on all hands that it has been one of the most bloody struggles ever decided in the streets of Paris. The National Guard are said to have at first turned out reluctantly and to have acted with hesitation, but at least they seem to have fought with the utmost determination and energy. The statements respecting the Guard mobile vary, as some reports affirm that a portion of it showed symptoms of disaffection and even refused to act against the insurgents, but other accounts speak in the highest terms of its courage and energy. The troops of the line appear never to have wavered or hesitated for a moment. Apprehensions that tranquility would be seriously disturbed were entertained on several days at the beginning of last week, and on Wednesday evening, crowds of workmen assembled on the Pont Neuf, in the Rue de Bac, in the Place d'Assemblée Nationale, but no violence was restored to for the dispersion of the attroupement. A collision took place in the Rue Rambuteau, where the troops were ordered a group who resisted, and several of whom were wounded. Pursuant to their determination to diminish the number of ouriers and the danger which their presence in such masses in Paris threatened to the public peace, the government directed that a first draft of 3,000 of them, natives of the provinces, should be obliged to leave Paris for their homes on Thursday. Now, I just want to quickly cover the fact that there's some very difficult vocabulary in there again. Do not worry if there's, chunks you do not understand, okay? Don't let that put you off or make you think you can't do this question. Focus instead on the bits you do understand, okay? Because there's certainly going to be some bits in there that you can make inferences from. So it's not going to be a case that you don't understand the whole thing. There are going to be bits that you can take information from if you do struggle with the language and vocabulary in this extract. So the question we've got today, you now need to refer only to source B. How does the writer use language here to convey the violence and behaviour of the rioters and police? You can include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, sentence forms. Now, I've highlighted the keywords in the question, which is something that you should do in your exam. Make sure you highlight the keywords in the question. So the first keyword is we're looking for things that convey the violence, and then we're looking for things that might tell us about the behaviour of the rioters and police. So really there's sort of 3 key things we're looking at: the violence, the rioters, and the police. And then within that, we can look at words and phrases. We can look at any language techniques, which generally are harder to spot in this particular paper and this particular question than paper 1. So really our focus is going to be primarily words and phrases, but if we find the other 2 things, so language features and sentence forms, we can comment on them as well. It is not essential that you comment on all 3 things. It can obviously help you to have a more varied response, but it is not essential. So I would like you to read through that source again on your own, if possible. And as you read through, I want you to highlight any quotations that relate to violence, behaviour of the rioters, or police. Once you have 5 or 6 pieces of evidence highlighted, you don't need much more than that, because you're not going to be writing many more paragraphs or peds than that. Then stop, okay? You don't need to waste time and do more. Remember, timing is really important on this paper. I want you to annotate what each point you have chosen infers regarding violence or the behaviour of rioters. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have time in the exam to spend that much time annotating, but this isn't an exam, this is a practice. So do spend that time planning and prepping for your response, okay? Make some notes in the margin on the extract. What do the examples you've highlighted infer or tell us or suggest, okay? And you might sort of circle keywords and phrases as well to help with the next part of the question. So I've actually gone through and I've highlighted what I think are some key quotations to help and support you. So First one, I'm only going to do 3 or 4 of these, but obviously if you're really struggling, you can look at the rest I've highlighted to help you. And the next task, we'll look at a few of these in detail anyway. But we've got ones like revolt has at last been quashed. Now I thought like the word revolt is a really powerful, stirring word. And you might associate it with the word revolting, which has connotations of sort of unpleasantness and disgust. So the writers are almost portrayed in a disgusting way almost immediately in this extract. And then we've got the combatants seem to have been animated with the most obstinate fury. So the words like combatant, it portrays imagery of war. So we almost get the impression that the civilians or the writers are at war with the police, making them seem like the enemy. And then we've got phrases like obstinate fury. So a fury that is almost objectionable, and that something they really shouldn't be feeling. So they're very much being portrayed as the enemy, even in these first couple of examples. And then that's followed up by the really emotive torrents of blood have flowed. So that really gives us this impression that almost the streets have been filled, almost quite literally, with rivers of blood, highlighting just how violent these riots have been. So I've only done 2 or 3 examples there, but you've heard some of the ideas that I've come up with. I've tried to think beneath the surface. I've tried to talk about what these words are really trying to portray to us sort of metaphorically, and what imagery they're creating in our heads. So you should try and do that for all the examples that you pick out. Okay, so this task is going to very much focus on what I've just been doing. So what I would like you to do is choose the quotation appropriate for your medal level to start with. You can work your way through if you feel like you need a bit more practice or you want a bit more prep for the final task. So the bronze quotation is torrents of blood have flowed, which I've just talked about. So that should make that slightly easier. The combatants seem to have been animated with the most obstinate fury is silver. And gold, the National Guard, at first turned out reluctantly, have acted without hesitation. And I thought that was a more complex quotation to pick apart, which is why I selected it as the gold option. Now, there's also 3 sort of medal tasks to complete in relation to each quotation as well. So for each quote that you look at, or just the one, I want to identify what the key words and phrases, or what are you going to zoom in on, what are you going to expand upon. Then I want you to explore the connotations and associations of those words. So that's going to help you to think about the hidden meaning or the inferred meaning that the writer was trying to achieve. So for example, for bronze, you might focus on that word torrent and what that implies and what it might relate to and link to. And then the image that then portrays to us. And then lastly, gold, any techniques and methods that you perhaps have noticed. Okay, for example, metaphor, hyperbole or exaggeration, those sorts of things. So I would probably give yourself between 5 and 10 minutes to give that a go, to really help you prep for this final part. And this is just a task that's really going to help you with how you select keywords and phrases and how you select quotations and then how you analyze them, which is really what this question is all about. Okay, so we're going to move on to the actual question. I'm not going to read it out again, but there it is for you on the right-hand side of the pane. It's 12 marks, and just a reminder, that's around 15 minutes, okay? So I would like you to have a go at answering the question now. I've given you a writing frame. Now, if you're going for the very top marks, it would not be wise to follow this very rigid writing frame. You need to be a bit more free-flowing, which is, in a minute, I'm going to show you another support there. So if you're going for those top marks, I'm going to give you an alternative slide to look at to really help you expand your technical vocabulary and how you word your argument. But this is certainly a very good frame to use to get the sort of level 3 response, which is grade 4, 5 and above, okay? So make your point. The example sentence starter I give you is in the extract, the writer portrays something, something as being something, something. Evidence, this is exemplified by, but you can use multiple words there. This is illustrated by, this is suggested by, or you might actually, if you're going for top marks, try and embed the quotation in your point. Then explain, so what does that quotation suggest to us? What is it showing us? And now the most important part, which is the develop. What else are you saying? What is the deeper meaning or idea that the language you're focusing on is trying to get across to us? And make sure that does relate to those 3 key things, which is violence, the rioters and the police, okay? Don't go off on a tangent and talk about something else. And that might sound something like furthermore, the word phrase, something, something, might also imply or suggest. Okay, so give yourself 15 minutes, answer that question, and just remember to pause the video before it moves on. Okay, so for the higher students, I did say I would show you an alternative. Now, this is a resource I've created for both literature and language. So these sentence starters are not necessarily going to apply to this question, but some of them do. For example, the writer's use of language helps too. The author's use of something something helps to create the impression. The word something something is powerful as. So there's some alternative sentence starters to help and support you there. I've then got technical vocabulary. So these are words you should need to try and include in your essays just to make them sound more impressive and to make you sort of sound more articulate when you're presenting your idea. So we've got words like illustrates, exemplifies, portrays, insinuates, encapsulates, and demonstrates. I've then got what is your argument? So they're just some questions to think about. Not all of them are relatable. For example, you don't need to talk about structure necessarily, but questions like have you identified any techniques or methods? Have you kept your response focused on the question? Have you used textual references? That's something that's needed basically for every question in English. What evidence are you using to support your argument? And have you remembered to check your SPAG? And then we've got linking connectives and contrasting connectives to use. Okay, and that's just going to, again, make your writing sound more fluid and make your argument sound like it's a cohesive argument where point links to point or contrasts to point. They're not just random ideas lumped together. And then I've got some banned statements of words. So you really need to try and avoid these words and statements. They're very basic. And any English examiner or teacher marking your work will certainly frown if they see you using any of these words. Okay, so to finish, you should have finished the question. Hopefully you've given a very good response. And if you need to go back to any earlier points in the video, make sure you do that. We've got the mark scheme on the next slide. So if you do have a partner, most likely you don't, you're on your own, you could ask a family member or a parent to check your work and try and mark it as per the mark scheme, okay? And then also check it for SPAG using the literacy code, okay? So just double check your spelling, your punctuation, your capital letters, so on and so forth, and correct them if you haven't. And here is the mark scheme. So please have a look at each of the categories and see where you most likely fit into or where your partner most likely fits into. Okay, so that is the end of the video today. I hope you found this useful for question 3. Next week, I'll be looking at question 4, one of the hardest questions across both papers. Anyway, please drop a like if you did find the video useful. If not, let me know why, what I can do better, how I can improve next week, etc. Hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you guys next week.